Chapter 3. President Pam. Everybody in the pet club was silent as Donna Martin opened the last ballot. This would decide whether Joey Brill or Pam Hollister would be the club's president. When Donna opened the slip of paper, a big smile came over her face, and she put the vote on Pam's pile. Shouts of joy from some and murmurs of grumbling from others filled the room. "Good for you, sis," Pete Hollister grinned. Joey Brill jumped up and stormed to the front of the room. "If a girl's going to be president, I'm getting out," he cried. Holly giggled. "Good riddance," she said under her breath. "What does Pam Hollister know about pets anyway?" Joey went on. "She knows plenty," Ricky defended his sister. "We have a dog, a mother cat, and 5 kittens, and all of them love Pam." Miss Nelson picked up a ruler and rapped on the desk for silence. "Pam Hollister has been elected president of the pet club," she said. "Joey, we'd like you to remain. Perhaps you'd run for secretary." "Not me," the boy said, glowering. "Being secretary's a sissy job." "That isn't true, Joey," said Miss Nelson. "There are many fine men who are secretaries in the cabinet of our United States government." Joey slunk back to his seat and said no more. "I nominate Dave Meade to be secretary," called out 8-year-old Jeff Hunter. "Second the motion," Holly added quickly. Joey Brill and his friends were so angry at his losing the election for president that they did not nominate anybody to be secretary, and Dave won easily. Miss Nelson gave Nave a notebook in which to write down a report of the meeting. Then the teacher explained what the club members would do. "Each of you will select an animal to study," she said. "I want to study horses," Donna spoke up. "And hamsters for me," Dave said. Holly and Ricky whispered to each other. Then the red-haired boy raised his hand. "May my sister and I study raccoons, Miss Nelson?" he asked. "You surely may," she replied. Then she looked toward the back of the room. "Joey, what would you like to study?" "I wanted to study raccoons," he said, scowling. "If you wanted to take raccoons, you should have spoken sooner. Now, Joey, what other animal would you prefer?" "A donkey," Ricky said impishly. Several children giggled, and Joey's face became very red. "I'll get you for saying that, Ricky Hollister," he shouted. "There's nothing wrong with studying donkeys," Miss Nelson said, trying to make peace. But her patience was tried to the breaking point. "He can't call me a donkey and get away with it," Joey exclaimed. "Ricky didn't say any such thing," Miss Nelson said evenly. "Joey, if you can't behave yourself, you may leave." As the other children snickered, Joey realized he had had enough of the argument. He lapsed into a sullen silence, casting mean looks at the Hollisters. Pete was next to speak up for a pet. "Pam and I would like to study about Eskimo dogs, Miss Nelson," he said. "We saw the Trappers' Carnival on TV." At this request, an expression of sadness came over the teacher's face. She gazed out the window, a faraway look in her eyes. Pete and Pam stared at each other, mystified. Had the boy said something wrong? Is it all right if we study Eskimo dogs?" Pete continued. "Why, yes, perfectly all right," Miss Nelson said, turning back quickly. She added that Eskimo huskies were wonderful animals, and that the Hollisters would have fun studying them. One by one, the other children selected animals. Joey Brill, the last to raise his hand, said he would take polar bears. Finally, the meeting ended. As the pet club members left the classroom, Joey tried to trip Ricky, but he jumped nimbly over the mean boy's foot and scampered away. Next morning, when the pupils in Miss Nelson's class assembled, they were surprised to find that the teacher was not there. "I wonder if she's ill," Pam whispered to her friend Ann Hunter. She had hardly finished saying this when the door opened, and Mr. Russell, the principal, walked in. "Word has been received that Miss Nelson is ill," he said. "I have been telephoning to locate a substitute teacher, but no one is available. I shall probably combine your class with another one later." Pam Hollister rose from her seat and walked up to the principal. "Mr. Russell," she said, "my mother used to be a school teacher. Perhaps she can help out." The man's eyes brightened. "Fine, fine," he said. "I'll telephone her immediately." "There's only one thing," said Pam. "I have a little sister at home. Sue's only 4. Mother wouldn't have anyone to leave her with." Mr. Russell smiled. "We'll put Sue in the kindergarten." The principal asked Pam if she would take roll and act as monitor for a few minutes until he returned. Then he hurried from the room. 10 minutes later, Mr. Russell reappeared. "Your mother has consented to come and help us," he said, smiling. "In the meantime, I want all of you to do some studying. Get out your arithmetic books." The pupils obeyed, but 2 minutes after Mr. Russell had left, a boy named Will Wilson, who had voted for Joey Brill, looked up. The silence in the room was suddenly disturbed as he called out sneeringly, "The monitor's a teacher's pet. She's the head of the pet club." A couple of Joey's other backers laughed. Pam Hollister was angry, and Anne was too. She rose from her seat and started for Will's desk. Pam was fearful. She did not want her friend to get in trouble on her account. "Anne, please sit down," the young monitor begged. "And Will, you'd better keep still or Mr. Russell will make us all stay after school." "Ah, who cares?" Will said. Nevertheless, he kept quiet. Will had a newspaper delivery route and did not want to be late for it. Anne sat down. A short time later, Mrs. Hollister appeared at the door. "Hello, Mother," Pam said, getting up. "Did Sue go to the kindergarten?" Mrs. Hollister nodded yes. Then Pam introduced her to the other pupils. They all rose and said good morning. After they had taken their seats again, the children became exceptionally quiet. They liked Mrs. Hollister immediately, and even the most fidgety ones tried hard to be attentive. After the arithmetic period was over, the new teacher asked how many of the children had seen the Trappers' Carnival on television. As several raised their hands, Pam was reminded of Miss Nelson and the sad look that had come over her face when Pete had mentioned Eskimo dogs. Talk turned to the wonderful animals, which had saved so many lives in the far north by carrying food and medicine to people lost in blizzards. "Huskies can stand very intense cold," Mrs. Hollister said, "and they can live for long periods on a small amount of food. Just some dried fish, washed down with a gulp of snow. A good team of these dogs can draw a load of hundreds of pounds, 40 or more miles a day over smooth snow." "Wow," said several of the boys. The new teacher now turned to the reading for the day. As the pupils found their places, there came a sudden rap on the door. "Come in," Mrs. Hollister called, but nobody appeared. She left the desk and went to the door. Upon opening it, she found 2 men standing outside. One was tall and heavily built, the other short and slight. Both were rough and unpleasant looking. "Is there something I can do for you?" Mrs. Hollister asked the men. "Yes, Mrs. Nelson, we want to ask you some questions," the short one said gruffly. "Step out here." "But I'm not Mrs. Nelson," Mrs. Hollister told them. "She's ill today and I'm taking her place." The men looked at each other. "Okay," said the heavy-set one in a deep, unfriendly voice. "We'll be back." The men turned and hurried down the corridor without saying another word. Pam was worried. Since these rough characters did not seem to know Miss Nelson, what could they have wanted of her? Miss Nelson was becoming more mysterious every minute. After the reading lesson was over, Mrs. Hollister said to the class, "How would you like to discuss winter sports?" "Oh, yes, please," the pupils cried, and a girl named Carol said she had an uncle who was a wonderful skier. He could jump off high platforms and never tumble. "Huh, that's nothing," Will Wilson scoffed. "My cousin Randy won a bobsled race at Sun Valley." "Why, Will," exclaimed Mrs. Hollister, "how thrilling! Won't you tell us about it?" Well, there's not much to tell," Will stammered. "He just won it, that's all. He was the driver. See, he and the other guys on his team raced down a big long track, must have been 50 miles long. Another sled jumped over the embankment. My cousin's sled, number 56B, just whizzed around them and won. Boy, was it exciting." "Have you any pictures you could show us?" asked Mrs. Hollister. Well, no, that is, I just read about it in the paper," Will finished lamely. "I'll say he read about it," a boy named Don Wells spoke up. "It was in Exciting Comics last month. Adventures of Randy Wilson." "What do you mean, Don?" Mrs. Hollister asked. "I'll bet he just made it up from that story in the magazine." All the children gasped and turned to stare at Will. "Is this true, Will?" Mrs. Hollister began. But just at that moment the children heard a giggle and running footsteps in the corridor. A moment later the door flew open. In ran Sue Hollister. Her face was smeared with red and black paint. "Mommy!" she cried, skipping over to Mrs. Hollister. "I'm an Indian, and I just got away from our camp." The pupils burst out laughing. "Sue," Mrs. Hollister exclaimed, "where did you get that paint?" "We were finger painting," Sue answered. "Remember when we saw the Indians out west? They finger painted their faces, didn't they, Mommy?" This remark made the pupils laugh all the harder. One mischievous boy said, "Can you dance like an Indian?" Before Mrs. Hollister could restrain Sue, the little girl put a hand to her mouth, let out a whoop, and began to dance around in a circle. "Sue, stop it," Mrs. Hollister pleaded. "I'm afraid the whole school will hear you, and there'll be trouble." Just then, other footsteps sounded in the corridor. The children stopped laughing, but they were concerned. If this were Principal Russell, he might make Mrs. Hollister leave at once. They did not want this to happen.